What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Fantasy Theory. Marvel's What If Season 2 is now rolling out every day until the 30th, so that means one episode every day, which is really cool. We've been speculating in a couple of videos of what's what, and I'm ready to say I was wrong on a few predictions. But anyway, this is Season 2, Episode 1, titled What If Nebula Joined the Nova Corps. This episode was actually pretty cool and fun, but let's jump right into the breakdown. This episode starts with a shot of an eerie-looking city. We find out that this planet is Xandar, which we see in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I believe Thanos destroyed this planet in Infinity War. Now, this episode gives me a lot of Blade Runner vibes due to the overall feel of the scenes, which I believe is done intentionally. But you guys help me out on that and let me know. Nebula, voiced by Karen Gillan, the same actress from the MCU, narrates this episode and voices the what-if version of Nebula. Nebula walks towards a dead Yondu. We even seen the fresh bullet hole in his back with smoke coming out from it, meaning this could have happened just minutes before. Other Nova Corps members descend from above to the scene, and one addresses Nebula, who is Garthon Saul. He addresses her as Corpman Nebula, so it seems as though she is just a normal ranked guard. Saul plays a huge part in this episode, but we last saw his live-action self back in Guardians Volume 1 in the Battle of Xandar, where he meets his demise. I don't know if I'm just saying this, but this episode gives me a vibe that something deeper is going on. If you watch this episode, you know there is a few twists in it, so I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but when I did the rewatch, I was getting that vibe. Saul says, "I don't need Black Order trash telling me how to do my job." This is a reference to the Black Order, also known as Thanos' children. We saw them in both Infinity War and Endgame. Nebula responds with, "Former Black Order. I earned my stars here, the same as you." The 3 stars on their armor represents the 3 suns on Xandar. Cool little Easter egg. Another thing, you can feel the animosity between the two. We get the intro narrated by the Watcher, and there are tons of broken glass shards that feature moments from last season and this season. I could go on and tell you all of them, but we'll be here for a while. In this timeline, Ronan betrays Thanos and kicks Nebula out of the Black Order, while also killing Gamora. Nebula is left stranded floating in space, but is found by Nova Prime. The Nova Corps headquarters looks exactly the same as the one in the movies. Ronan attacks Xandar, giving us another version of the Battle of Xandar. Without the help of Peter Quill and the Guardians and the Ravengers, Nova Corps decides to put a shield over Xandar that will last around 50 years. I noticed in the shield we see various lines and codes, kind of looking like a computer processor, which in my opinion fits the theme of the episode and further reminds me of Blade Runner. With the shields up protecting Xandar, I assume nobody can get in or out. With that being said, that means Yondu has been on this planet since then, which was 5 years ago. Nebula easily calls Yondu's arrow and triggers and unlocks an entire database out of the arrow. Nebula and Nova Prime begin to speak, and Nova Prime tells Nebula to get on the disclosed line. We see the lights turn red. In my opinion, this foreshadows there is something darker going on. Nova Prime tells Nebula any means necessary, and Nebula responds with, "I won't let you down." This seems like just a throwaway line, but actually has more meaning that we'll see later. Then we see her police vehicle dive down into the city streets from above. Now, I know I mentioned Blade Runner, but this also reminds me heavily of the planet Coruscant from Star Wars. Specifically, the scene reminds me of Anakin and Obi-Wan chasing the bounty hunters in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Nebula entering a casino, we see the A-Team, starting with Groot working at a poker table, Meek cutting fish, Korg as a bartender, and Drax playing a slot machine, but weirdly, that will be the only time we will see him in this episode. I also want to note he loses it and destroys it. Must have been a bad night for my man. Nebula asks to see the big man, which is a funny jab because she is referring to Howard the Duck, who is quite small. They are playing cards, which we know Howard likes to do because we've seen it in the Guardians of the Galaxy movie. They even look like they could be similar cards. Korg states that the arrow is an old city mainframe core. Nebula is looking for a source code for the shield generator. Nebula goes on to see Jan Rogue, who we know from the MCU as the man who worked with Ronan to wipe out the Skrulls as well as wipe Carol Denver, Captain Marvel's memory of the Skrulls, making her to believe they're a terrorist group. Nebula states he is an infiltrator, which she has arrested him for. We get a shot of Nebula arriving at which looks to be Klein, which is the prison from Guardians Volume 1. However, that prison was not on Xandar in Guardians, but in this timeline it looks to be on Xandar. Nebula hands off her weapons as she approaches Jan Rogue. She is being yelled at by other prisoners. We see the prison clothes are also the same thing from this episode and that the Guardians are wearing in Volume 1. Nebula shoots a lock screen that keeps him secured in, which is a very typical move on how to break out prisoners in movies. She then also releases all the other prisoners by using some tablet. When they escape, they fly to the top of the building and walk to a data core on the water, where there's a really interesting way to get to the data core. We see steps appear as Nebula ascends to the mainframe. The mainframe core says, Omega class cybernetic organism detected. I'm assuming this means that they are detecting Nebula's presence and Nebula's cybernetic advancements. She connects herself to the mainframe, collecting its data. However, young Rogue betrays her and goes to steal the information collected, in which she's still connected to the mainframe. The mainframe detects a threat and is starting a process to implode. Nebula's eyes turn red and she escapes from being imploded. However, we see him hand the drive filled with the intel to Nova Prime, who was also turned on Nebula. We find out that this has been a setup all along. This goes back to the foreshadowing of Nebula's earlier conversation with Nova Prime when the scene turning red. She escapes after being badly beaten by Nova Corps, and she heads back to the casino, which seems to be the only people she could trust at the moment. They do the right thing and fix her up. Nebula puts on Yondu's head fin, which I assume she took from his dead body. Next we see a pretty cool shot of the new A-Team, which includes Nebula, Groot, Meek, Korg, and Howard the Duck. Korg says, alright, we all look cool now, which I have to agree with him. And I also want to point out how Howard the Duck looks very Rambo with this headband and huge gun. Our final twist in the episode, Nebula reveals that she knew all along that Nova Prime betrayed her and the Oath when she told Nebula by any means necessary. Nebula put her own twist in the code and was able to close the shield, destroying Ronan and his ship. We get a little bit of a battle scene between the Nova Corps and the A-Team. Korg smashes Saul and young Rogue, just like Hulk did to Loki in the first Avengers, which is cool to see the amount of strength he actually has. Nova Prime and Nebula have a final battle, and instead of taking Nebula's hand when she's about to fall off the building, she tries to shoot Nebula, but instead falls to her death. Howard refers to Nebula as Supernova, and he quacks like a regular duck. Anyway, that's been my breakdown with all these episodes coming out every day. I must work on the next one now, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a Merry Christmas.